welcome to the latest of our Zoom seminars on housing as we mark coming home and year on. It's really good to welcome a wide and a diverse range of people. We've got over 200 people signed up for this evening's seminar. People from government, from local authority, developers, housing associations, all kinds of interesting community-based organizations, churches, peoples of all faiths and beliefs, and of no particular named faith, but all of us with faith in those who we are called to serve. I gather we've even got people here from New Zealand, where it's 5 in the morning, so you are welcome. The purpose of the event that we put together this evening is to update on how work has been developing since the publication in February 2021 of the Coming Home report, the report of the Archbishop's Commission on Housing, Church and Community. And it's really good to have some of those commission members here tonight, and indeed some of the people and organizations who've generously supported the work that's been going on financially and given pro bono support as well over these last 3 years in terms of the preparation of the report and bringing us to where we are. Our conference tonight is actually the 7th in a series of Zooms that have been led through Gloucester Diocese over the last few years, since we started with an in-person meeting, if you remember those, in 2019. And for me, one of the delights of these has been the way in which we've brought together people from all sorts of different communities and found that common cause in tackling the scandal named at the head of Coming Home, that around 8 million people in England live in overcrowded, unaffordable or unsuitable homes. I fear to think, with all that's happened in that period of time, what that figure might be now. We have 3 short addresses this evening, and then some discussion in small groups. And then we will reconvene in a plenary with an impressive panel. I'm going to introduce that to you later on, and then we'll finish with a launch and with a challenge. But before we begin, let's keep a moment of quiet and of reflection, and if you wish, join me in prayer. 8 million people living tonight in this country in overcrowded, unaffordable, unsuitable homes. We hold in our hearts as we gather the scandal of the housing crisis and our common cause to address those issues. And we pray for the work of all those who partner in that cause. In Jesus' name, amen. My first absolute pleasure is to introduce Bishop Guli, the Bishop for Housing. That was one of the first recommendations of the Coming Home report, was the appointment of a bishop for housing. And I'm delighted that Guli is undertaking this role. She's Bishop of Chelmsford. She came herself as a child refugee to the UK, fleeing the Iranian Revolution. She served in Southwark, in Peterborough, as Bishop of Loughborough in Leicester Diocese before moving to Chelmsford Diocese last year. And I'm really looking forward to all that you have to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Bishop Robert. A good evening to you all and a very warm welcome from me as well. It's really wonderful to have this opportunity to share with many of you who've been part of the conversation over this past year since the Coming Home report was published. And we are so very grateful for all the support, the encouragement and the challenge that we've received from fellow travellers who share our vision and commitment. On a personal note, it's been such a joy and privilege for me to be involved in this work, having been a total novice in the world of housing and coming to the role really with little more than a passion for the church to share the good news through action for social justice. I have learned so much from some of the most committed and knowledgeable experts in the field. And more than ever, I'm convinced that challenging though it is, this is a hugely significant area for the church to be involved in. And during this past year, I've also had cause often to reflect back on my first year in this country, arriving, as Bishop Robert has said, as a refugee in 1980. Having left home and country with no more than a suitcase each, my family were welcomed here, and for the first 18 months, we were offered secure housing, first in a theological college and then in a vacant vicarage. And that stability gave us the base from which we were able to start building new lives, and I will forever be grateful. Before we go any further, let me take this opportunity to acknowledge the many individuals and groups who've supported the work of the Housing Commission in so many ways. Without all of you, our work wouldn't have made the progress that it has. You know who you are. Bishop Robert has alluded to some of you. I wish I could mention you all by name, but we would be here for a very long time indeed if I did. But I can't continue without mentioning Gloucester Diocese for their significant financial support, their ongoing encouragement, and the example that they continue to set for the rest of us in their own management of land and housing developments. So tonight we want to share with you how we think the Church of England, in partnership with others who share our vision and values, can make a deep and lasting difference to the housing crisis in Britain. This journey began with the publication of the Coming Home report by the Archbishop's Commission on Housing, Church and Community some 15 months ago. The Commission was set up to explore further the ideas on housing, which the Archbishop of Canterbury had written about in his book, Reimagining Britain. And I'm delighted that Archbishop Justin is here with us this evening, and we're looking forward to hearing a little from him later on. And I also want to welcome two of the church commissioners who I believe are here. Alan Smith is the first Estates Commissioner, and he'll be on the panel later on as well. And I believe we may also have the second Estates Commissioner, Andrew Selous MP. That is, if he's been able to get away from his parliamentary business. I haven't actually spotted him on the screen yet. Following the publication of the Coming Home report, the Commission set up a small executive team and an advisory board, which I chair, to promote Coming Home's recommendations and to work out how to take the agenda forward. We've discovered a great deal of interest, not only within the church, but also among all sorts of stakeholders in the world of housing. Many people share our desire to see truly affordable homes for those who need them most, buildings that are high on safety and low on carbon, and communities that are diverse and welcoming. We could perhaps describe this past year as a research phase, as we've explored what it'll take to enable the church to deliver real social change around housing and community. And there are two key things which we've learned. The first is that the opportunity for making an impact on the housing crisis in a way that aligns with our mission and calling as a church is far, far greater than we'd imagined. But secondly, we've also learned that for the most part, the church is unable to respond to that opportunity. Part of the problem is that although the Church of England collectively owns 200,000 acres of land, in practice, the land is held by many different structures and institutions, like the 42 different dioceses around the country, church schools, thousands of parishes, and the national church commissioners. And of these, it's really only the church commissioners who currently have the capacity and the skills to develop strategic land for housing. They are, alongside the housing executive, keen to consider how greater support for dioceses could be delivered, and they're exploring ways that this could be achieved, including looking at pilot studies in a number of dioceses. We've been delighted by the way that the church commissioners have engaged with the Coming Home vision and agenda, and I want particularly to thank Alan Smith and others involved for that. Let me just give you a couple of examples of the kinds of things that they're doing. First, the church commissioners are implementing a comprehensive ESG framework around their strategic land portfolio. Among their priority areas, they list climate change and net zero carbon, biodiversity, housing access and affordability, and strategic land stewardship. Secondly, they've developed their strategic land statement, which now outlines the guiding vision and key principles for their developments in line with the 5 core values in the Coming Home report. And thirdly, they've offered to advise us on how our core values can be realistically and practically included in proposals for new housing developments. They're hoping to draw on their network of professional advisors to come up with a range of examples of how each of the values can be secured as new housing projects are designed and built. We are very excited to see this growing collaboration with the church commissioners, and we'll look forward to hearing a little bit more about that from Alan Smith later this evening. However, among other parts of the church, we found that a key barrier to moving forward with any housing project is the lack of capacity. Dioceses are under enormous financial pressure, exacerbated by COVID, which leaves them with little appetite for risk-taking around property development. The kind of social reform which we envisage just won't happen unless we can do something about that capacity and encourage dioceses to access appropriate help and assistance. So in light of all that we've learned over the past year, we're now embarking on a development phase over the next 12 to 18 months. This is aimed at overcoming some of the obstacles that I've mentioned and helping the church grow in both confidence and competence. And the plan can be divided overall into 5 main strands. Firstly, we'll be operationalizing the 5 core values. To remind you, these are that good housing should be sustainable, safe, stable, which includes affordability, sociable and satisfying. We need to ensure these values have real traction, changing the way that we provide housing as a church and hopefully impacting how the whole housing sector operates through our moral example and leadership. This strand includes engaging with the government, adapting the rules around disposing of church land and property, and providing advice and guidance to people making decisions at parish and diocesan levels. And later this evening, we'll be launching a new resource that's been created precisely for this purpose. Secondly, we want to build a movement for change. This is about capturing the energy and enthusiasm which Coming Home has stimulated and giving it structure, resilience, and the tools that people need to make a lasting difference. And we hope that you will all sign up to our mailing list following this evening's event. Thirdly, we're taking steps to set up a national housing association. This will enable the Church of England to become a major provider of social housing up and down the country in a way that challenges and disrupts the housing market. Crucially, we think this can be done without compromising existing ministries or best value investment returns to dioceses. Instead, the provision of housing and purposeful development of new communities can actually strengthen the witness of the Church by helping to fund people to serve those same communities and share the good news of the gospel. The fourth strand will pioneer a shared land management and development service. This is to address the core issue of a lack of capacity and skills at diocesan levels to steward and develop church-owned land and surplus properties. Overcoming this obstacle should unlock huge financial and missional potential within the Church. And the final strand involves the Diocese of Gloucester continuing to serve as a model to show the missional, financial, and environmental benefits of implementing these recommendations and demonstrating the breadth and depth of what is possible with the right culture and resourcing. And Ben Preece Smith will be telling us a little bit more about this shortly. Now, this degree of social change requires more land and buildings than we currently have, and it needs to be deliverable to every part of the country. If we only develop housing on land we currently own, we'll never bring about the justice that we long to see, nor will it be enough to turn the tide of the current housing crisis. That's why we're proposing to buy social housing on a significant scale, using low-interest debt available on the investment market, secured on the properties that we purchase and underpinned by the Church's own resources. This will also enable us to deliver housing, social change, and ministry funding beyond the realms of our existing inheritance into more marginalised areas where the need is greatest. We might think of all this as a kind of levelling up in a way that's rooted in the vision and the values coming from our faith. We want to rebuild some of our languishing post-war churches into vibrant mixed-use centres that create community and meet social, relational, and spiritual needs. In his first sermon, back in his home village of Nazareth, Jesus spoke of proclaiming good news to the poor. We today are committed to living out that good news in practical, life-affirming ways. That's what it really means to be the Church. But we can't do this on our own, which is why we welcome friends, partners, and fellow travellers. I hope that you can see that these are long-term, large-scale ambitions. They're born out of a conviction that there is plenty of life left in the Church. And this new vision around housing is one way to express that. The oft-quoted narrative of decline isn't the only story, and we shouldn't let it become the loudest. We want to use the gifts and talents that God has entrusted to us as the Church to make real the command to love our neighbours. We want to build flourishing neighbourhoods and demonstrate that our physical dwelling places can be a foretaste of coming home to our true dwelling place with God. So thank you for joining us this evening. I'm now going to hand back to Bishop Robert, who will introduce our next speaker.
Bishop Guli, thank you very much indeed for that, and that sense of the journey that we've been taken, all working with this inspirational report and actually making sure that it's not just about the words, but it's beginning to have impact and making a difference. Lots I know there that we will come back to when we come to our panel discussion. I'm now really pleased to introduce Benjamin Preece Smith. Benjamin lives in Fairford, a graduate of Bristol, theology and politics, a chartered accountant, worked for KMPG, moved into hostile takeovers. Ben's also our Darson secretary here in Gloucester. I think I've not noticed any hostile takeovers yet, Ben. worked for Christian Aid as head of finance and has been in this diocese since 2004 as director of finance and now as diocesan secretary. But always with a wider view. Ben established the parish giving scheme, now the largest shared service in the church. I love working with Ben's imagination, creativity, and ability to get things done. Ben, really look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you, Bishop Law. It's embarrassing to have a longer introduction than Bishop Guli, but thank you. We first became aware of the Housing Commission being launched when we were asked to supply some stories about what we as a diocese have been doing for development, and particularly around affordable housing. As a diocese, for the past 20 years, we've essentially noticed that the cost of ministry isn't being funded by parish share. And we've used good development with moral framework as a means of subsidising the cost of ministry. And that's been true for my entire time here. So when the report was launched, we were extremely interested in it. And we particularly picked up on the target, originally widely shared. The hope was for the church to deliver 10,000 homes on its land within 10 years. Now, the Diocese of Gloucester is approximately 1% of the Church of England, or of England more generally, which would mean the target for us was 100 homes. Since the report was launched, we've secured planning permission for a site for 120 houses. It was only identified the previous year. The site has been sold to a high quality local SME developer in line with the recommendations of Coming Home, and 40% will be made available for affordable housing, and that will be delivered what's called tenure blind, so the same quality housing for market as affordable housing. So we've hit our target in that sense. We've also made £5 million from that land development, and the trustees of the Board of Finance have tied the profits from that disposal in order to fund the work of the Housing Executive. And so it would be very possible at this point in time that Gloucester can retire happy, knowing it's done its bit and it's supported the work. But what struck us is essentially how quick and easy it was to achieve that target. And so with Bishop Guli, we realised that the church must be capable of so much more than we might ask or imagine. 1,000 homes nationally, really enough to help those really in crisis. So as a diocese, we're looking over the next 2 to 3 years at a range of innovative ways to increase the amount of housing provision on our land. We are not looking at a fire sale, and we're not looking at rapacious development under the guise of doing a social good. We are seeking to be wise as servants and as innocent as doves, intelligent stewards of the land we have inherited. So let me offer you some examples of what that means at the local level. Firstly, and the very first day after Coming Home was launched, we were approached by an enthused incumbent who asked and reviewed all the land in his benefice using the mapping tool developed by the Commission. As a result of this, he identified 3 possible sites with the help of English Rural Housing, and with their guidance, we're now looking to build 4 new alms houses in an unused section of a vicarage garden. Be built to high environmentally progressive standards in a conservation area. There'll be self-funding over time, as well as relieving the vicar of a maintenance job. In Gloucester City, we are looking in partnership with Rooftop Housing Association at turning the site of a church which has been closed to move on accommodation for rough sleepers, affordable flats for families, and a ground floor cafe and community space to be run by and for the local church and community. A site which has been unused for a decade can help break the cycle of homelessness on our streets. Elsewhere in the diocese, we're looking at turning another closed church, listed this time, into 9 carbon zero flats with a specialist commercial developer. Geographically, we're a predominantly rural diocese, and we're really interested in the creative role that the increased availability of self-building could have, particularly on the organic development of some of our ancient villages. Not only is self-build the way in which our villages have historically grown, evidence also shows that self-build home owners are many more times likely to stay in homes they have built than normal market homes. We know that empty homes are a great concern for our villages. Therefore, by being considerate in construction approach, we hope we will not simply be adding houses, but socially engaged people to village life. We're partnering with an award-winning local architect, Tom Howard, on 2 modest village sites in different locations in the diocese. One with a particular focus on how we might deliver self-build models to an affordable housing market via his new venture. Like most dioceses, we have a lot of what's called meanwhile land that is waiting for something to be done with it. On these sites, we're working with an exciting local startup called MMC House Building, led by Angus Fraser, who I think is here tonight, which has been developing living pods. These homes are built from recycled materials with the help of prisoners on day release. They're beautifully made and fully movable, so can be used temporarily on sites with more straightforward planning requirements than permanent developments. These homes are particularly suitable as accommodation for ex-offenders, and the South West Reoffending Partnership is committed to helping enable these pods to revolutionise local reoffending rates. They would also be a great resource to help with refugee accommodation. Each pod costs in the region of £60,000 and will generate around £6,000 a year in rental income, even on social rent. So as well as doing good, they make a good return, and we can treat them as a genuine investment in our communities. Emerging from the pandemic, our house building subsidiary, Good and Faithful Servant, is looking to build 2 small sites out over the next year, with all profits from the development donated back to the Diocesan Board of Finance to fund mission. In addition to these sites, we continue to manage our glebe land holdings with the aid of our superb glebe committee chaired by Tony McFarlane. With their help, we have 400 homes allocated in the local plans, of which 40% are for affordable housing. Together with the above schemes, we should maintain our overall target of building more affordable than market housing on our land, a policy which has been in place for over a decade. If we achieve all this, which is not unreasonable, we will have delivered 600 homes, 300 of which would be affordable. We would also have made in the region of 40 to 50 million pounds to support ministry. That's roughly twice what we currently have to support ministry as an endowment in cash investments. If this were replicated nationally, that would be 60,000 homes and £5 billion. What's stopping this? Well, Bishop Guli has already explained that as a church, we are the biggest obstacle. We need to grow in capacity, confidence, and competence. But this is not beyond us if we work together. But for those who really yearn to see a reimagined Britain, we're left asking if this is really enough to affect transformation. 60,000 homes, 30,000 affordable homes hardly changes the world. The government believes around 300,000 new homes are needed each year. This would mean at best we would be contributing just 2% of the need. So we must ask, what more can we do? That's where the idea of a new housing association is potentially transformational. Working in partnership with other housing associations, focused on rents affordable with just housing benefit, using our balance sheet to secure cheap long-term debt. We believe collectively as the church, we can bring our economic weight in genuine support of the poorest in our community and help address the viability issues identified in the Coming Home report head on. We believe it is possible for the church to buy significant allocations of social housing, thereby driving up qualities and quantities without raising rents. We also believe this new financial model has the capacity to provide essential locally based ministry to turn homes into community. Working with our friends at Bromford Housing, we hope to have a pilot example of how this could work in the diocese within the next year or two. This would change the church's direct involvement in helping with the housing crisis, from being a strategy potentially to exit our land portfolio into one in which we look to grow with a new pseudo-endowment model that brings social justice for the poor and a Christian presence in every community at the same time. Is this possible? Yes. YMCA have a similar scheme already in Cheltenham, and it's not a dissimilar model to the way in which many housing associations have grown over the past couple of decades. But to make this work, we need not just the financial assets of the church, but our greatest asset, the network of local volunteers and ministers that really make up the Church of England. Without them and their local leadership, we will just become another cog in the house building machine. Our real vocation is not to build houses, but to build connections and relationships, to build communion with one another and God. The type of people who need to really deliver social transformation will be a lot like our next speaker, Ed, rooted to place, community and people in a deeply Anglican ministry. Thank you, Bishop Robert.
Benjamin, thank you so much for that, and apologies to Bishop Guli if I gave you a longer introduction, but I have got to see you at a meeting next week. But really inspiring always to listen to you, and that sense of endeavour and impact, and that desire to use the assets of the church to bring about real change. And as you rightly pointed there at the end, it brings us to the last of our three speakers, Ed Sauven, who is a pioneer priest in the Diocese of Gloucester. Ed is currently engaged in the business of co-creating a new monastic community called Wayfarers in Stroud. It's part of the Grace Network, which is a social enterprise hub of some nearly 50 staff across 7 social enterprises in just outside Stroud. I can honestly say of all the things that I've seen, and in terms of conversations with clergy, of all the conversations I've had, my conversations with Ed are truly inspiring, and I am absolutely delighted, Ed, that you are here this evening. Before this, you worked in the construction industry, and I know that's coming very useful over recent months as a structural designer and sustainable materials consultant. And I'm just so pleased that you're here tonight to reflect with us. Ed, thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Robert, for a very generous introduction. It's been inspiring to hear what is happening, and this initiative sort of becoming a movement. And I have to say, I was a little surprised at this invitation to speak. I mean, as Bishop Robert shared, I'm embedded in a social enterprise, so we exist to offer life opportunities through work. We want to see a changed economy. So we are not directly connected with the housing sector. But I hope that in sharing my belief in the transformative power of community, I can remind us all of the why actually we need to invest in this initiative with everything that we have, and to just throw the kitchen sink at this crisis. And so I really want to begin by sharing just a few of the experiences of my community. We exist to offer jobs to those who are financially vulnerable. We seek to offer apprenticeships. And so you can imagine there are endless stories of struggles around housing. We have one apprentice who last year was fighting through the courts to keep his flat. He was fortunately successful. One staff member has, over the last couple of years, been forced to move for every 6 months for reasons that are really not her own. Others have family members sleeping in their lounges. One prospective apprentice has been told he will need to be moved to the nearest city, and so he is uncertain of committing with us. And then one 19-year-old apprentice, we are really battling to keep him on. His sheltered housing is not safe, and he's been drawn deeper and deeper into addiction. And so we're seeking to be a community of transformation that enables people to change And yet we're really hamstrung by this crisis, because however much we do, they go home to places that some of them don't call a home. They just call them spaces. And obviously this is all familiar to you. You've heard plenty of these stories. They are all too familiar. And yet we want to join with all church and all society in seeing change. We want to live out that Jesus' manifesto, as Bishop Guli shared, and for people to see freedom. And whilst we're doing this in the workplace, it has to happen in housing too, and in our wider communities. I just want to share as a second point from my experiences and reflections. And I may personally not have had to experience this crisis. I go home to a safe and comfortable home. But this last year, we have had a challenge in the Grace Network. We, in September, were evicted from our space. And despite 2 years before looking for other places and warehouses, we couldn't find anywhere. And so we were forced to choose to take on a derelict mill. And we wanted to take on this daunting task because we believed in what we did. But more and more, this challenging journey has reminded me of the importance and the centrality of land and place, because we are a place-based community. We couldn't exist as a distant network. It needs a healthy community rooted in place for it to be transformative. And I was reminded by Walter Brueggemann's words, the eminent thinker and theologian in the church, who wrote that land is a central, if not the central strand of biblical faith. And so, a consequence, we can't really talk of faith or spirituality or questions of what it means to be community people without talking about land. We're unable to live and flourish without being rooted in the ground beneath us. And I think I'd like to move on just to share a little of what I mean by rooted, because obviously every house, every community is sitting on land by default. But what I try to live out as rooted is this incarnational living of being immersed and investing in a shared life. I'm not normally wearing a collar. I'm normally in overalls, trying to fix a leaky mill, trying to support social enterprises. But we're always trying to find shared rhythms, shared ways of learning, shared meals, opening up our lives. And for all of us in faith communities and any authentic community, we know that this is messy, it's fragile, it requires vulnerability. We know that community is hard. And yet all of us persevere because in community we see beauty. We are rewarded and enriched beyond belief. And it's in belonging and giving ourselves to others that we become all that we're called to be. And so I've more and more in my learning realized that the question of what it is to be human and what it is to be community are the same question. And they both need to take place rooted in a particular place and time. And when we allow people to be disconnected and robbed of place, then we rob them of belonging and identity. We place their lives on hold. And I'd just like to briefly go back to Jesus' manifesto, where we began, because I find it so intriguing that at the end of that, Jesus actually talks about the year of the Lord's favor. He talks about Jubilee and this strange practice of every 50 years taking an entire year's rest. And as part of that, land returns to its occupants, because there's this belief that land is so sacred it can't be owned. And that is an idea that's so radical that it probably was never lived out. And it's so radical that even today we think it's not possible. And yet perhaps indigenous cultures would think otherwise. Jesus speaks as much about land as he does people, because he knows the two can't be divided. I want to just finish with a picture of community that I hold on to. And after our challenging journey through last year in a cold and wet and leaky mill, together with volunteers and professionals and trade, we managed to make it weathertight. And we managed to get our enterprises back online. And before Christmas, we had this thank you meal. And I remember getting up and seeing down this long table countless new friends that I'd met, a new community in this place. And it was a profound moment of connection. It was a profound image of a beautiful community. And it reminded me of Jesus's words, of what he asks of us. It reminds me of the kingdom of God and why we need to do everything to make community possible for those who are displaced, for whom at present it is not possible because they have no home. And I really hope that you all will be able to join this initiative and allow beautiful communities to erupt and flower from soil across our land. And there are plenty of challenges, but it is technically possible. It simply needs us to have the perseverance to continue on this pathway. There's incredible opportunities that have been opened up and shared by Bishop Guli and Ben, and I just commit it to you with all my heart. Thank you for letting me share.
Ed, a huge thanks for those reflections and taking us to the heart, I think, of where we are called to be when we think about housing. We see that bigger strategic picture, but then we are reminded about that importance of home. And for me, one of the things, as we've worked on this, that has always been crucial is that sense that talking about houses, and I walked around some empty houses on some building sites yesterday, and they are houses, they are shells, but they need to become homes in which people come and live and make their dwelling, and then those homes get built together in community. And of course, that's very much what we're all about, and that's community is exactly what I see happening in the work that you're doing, that land and that place. Enormously rich diet that we've been given by our three speakers. And what we're going to do now is to have 20 minutes or so to go into groups. Catherine's going to put us into groups in a moment. And I suggest that in the groups, we just reflect a little bit on what it is we heard, what struck us from the speakers who've been sharing with us this evening. And then you might want to pick up from that about what are the things that have challenged us and what are the questions that we would want to ask of each other and of the panel. And I think the groups are fairly random, but I do hope that you get a good cross-section of folk in those groups. One of the things, just looking at the chat, that recognition of the different perspectives we come from, and I'm sure that should enable a good discussion. And then we'll come back together and we'll start off with some comments from our panel, and we'll try and take as many questions as we can as we have some time together at about 7:05. Welcome back. I hope that you had a really good discussion indeed. We've got a chance now to continue that discussion a bit in our larger plenary session. if you've got questions or comments that you'd like to make, can I ask you to put those into the chat? And Chris Beals, who many will know, will try and keep an eye on that and be pushing me to ask the questions, as many as we can, of the panel. In addition to those who've already spoken, I'm really pleased to welcome to the panel Alan Smith, who is the first Estates Commissioner, joined the Church Commissioners last autumn, having previously been with HSBC and involved in risk and inclusion. So really good to have you with us, and of course to have the Archbishop of Canterbury. And we've seen already his book, A Reimagining Britain, and that led to the Commission and responsible in many ways for us being here tonight because of the establishment of the Commission and all that's brought to us. I'm going to slightly swap things around first, and Alan, and come to you if I may, just to give you a couple of minutes to reflect on what you've heard and perhaps the kind of capacity of the Church of England and Church Commissioners to deliver.
First of all, thanks a lot. I mean, it's been really humbling to be hearing all the voices, in particular flowing from Bishop Guli's introduction, because for the church, in particular for us as commissioners, this is one of the defining issues that we're facing. You know, to provide housing to the scale, to model what the provision of substantive and meaningful, affordable and social housing is, has to be and is at the top of our agenda. And Bishop Guli talked about a number of the ways that we've been prioritizing. I think two of the biggest ones from our perspective is collaborating in the way in which we're collaborating with all of the other areas of the church. And I think also being willing to move ahead while not having all the answers. And Bishop Guli talked a bit earlier about the need to pilot the dioceses that we're piloting particular projects on, you know, to really be driven by the fact that this has to be at the top of how we minister. And, you know, the commissioners in particular, the Bishop of Manchester, Bishop David Walker, who is on the call, who chairs the board of the commissioners, but also is on a housing association board himself. We very much have this up front and center.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure there'll be other things that will come back to you later in our time together. Archbishop Justin, let me come to you for a reflection briefly on what you've heard this morning, what's struck you in our meeting.
Or even this evening.
This evening, yeah, it's been a long day.
Thank you very much. And first, thank you to everyone who's doing this. I only heard about this last week. I'm so glad I was free this evening and able to use up the time. This is just incredibly inspiring. And again, like Alan, I feel very humbled by what is going on and the impact that the Coming Home report has had. Thank you all very much, especially to the Diocese of Gloucester. I think I wanted just to pick up about 3 points. First of all, the priority of the housing crisis is getting worse than it was rather than better, because high levels of inflation, very rapidly rising levels of poverty, the real incomes crisis, with real incomes rising far below the levels of inflation, all these, and the likelihood of recession, all of these are putting enormous pressure on housing. And if you're building a more just society, housing is one of the core building blocks. It goes with education and health historically, and it goes with adequate good food supply inevitably. And those are the areas that are, and energy, communication, those are the areas that are under the most pressure. So this has got more urgent than ever. Secondly, I do think I'm really struck listening to people about the need for partnership. Alan's just referred to that. and the need for radical imagination, the need to see what could be done. I'm so impressed with what Ben and Gloucester have been doing. And that shows the radical imagination that we need. Partnership is essential, and we've done that extraordinarily as the church in other places, particularly around our equity investments through the church commissioners, where what is in international terms a relatively small portfolio of sort of £6-7 billion or a bit more than that, has been leveraged through bringing in partners to about $30 trillion of funds that are committed, for instance, to tackling climate change, to greater equity, to anti-slavery, and so on and so forth. And that's been done and led by the church commissioners and the pension board. And that shows what partnership with the skills of leveraging other partners can do. And I think it emphasizes how important us taking a lead and bringing people with us are to enable this to have far more impact. I'm really excited by the housing association idea. The area I want to end with is risk appetite and capacity. And Ben had those three that we lack: capacity, confidence, and competence. And that's an unholy trinity, but I think a really important one. I hope that the commissioners and others can find ways in which we increase capacity, or competence, I suppose. I am particularly keen that we look for how, through mutual learning and training, we can do something about competence. Capacity and confidence, I think, are a huge challenge. I just wonder if, again, people like the commissioners within the church, and by building up partnerships, we can't find ways, better ways of risk sharing that enables dioceses at a time when they are stretched to take a more active role, knowing that some of the downside risk can be managed effectively. Risk allocation can go to the richest in return, perhaps for a slightly lower return, in exchange for a slightly lower return. I just wonder if we look at some underwriting of risk as a way of helping deal with the risk appetite at a time of great strain and stress. I am more convinced from hearing this than ever that we can make an enormous difference, and we have the people within the church who will do it, and we have the partners on this call who we can do it with and learn a huge amount from them. Thanks very much, Robert.
Archbishop Justin, thank you. And that sense of we can make a difference, and the impact here, I think, is one of the things that makes me passionate about the work that we're doing, and that you've guided us towards. There's a real challenge there to the commissioners, and I'm not going to come back to you and put you on the spot, but we leave you with that for the moment.
No, please do. If you have me facing the first ball, so don't hesitate to ask me any questions if you'd like to.
I will put you on the spot for 30 seconds because we must get some other voices in as well. But do come back on that if you want to.
I think there are two things. I think there's risk sharing, but more importantly, there is capacity sharing and capability sharing. And already working with Ben and Bishop Guli, we're making that happen. We're from the property team, we're going in and working with some of those dioceses that we're piloting to do that. And I think more of that should continue.
Thank you. And that, I know, will be a good conversation as it goes on. Bishop Guli, let me come to you for a moment. One of the questions that's been raised through the chat has been about affordability. I'm going to come to you and then I'm going to come to Ben on that. and what is truly affordable, because clearly the important thing about houses is that we've got individuals and families that are living in them, but that's no good if they simply can't afford them, even if they meet the definition of affordability. What for you is truly affordable then?
Yeah, I think this is one of the really major significant issues, that it's a convenient strap line to talk about affordability and to say X percentage of whatever new developments will be affordable. But in reality, the government's definition of affordable is 80% of market rent value. Well, in some parts of the country, that's not affordable at all. So I think we're increasingly using the term truly affordable in order to press that definition further, and also talking about social housing. So I think we can demonstrate something about what we mean by affordability when we're involved in projects that we have some say over. And then the other strand to this is ongoing conversation with government. And that actually hasn't yet been mentioned, I don't think, this evening, but it is an important strand of our work. Continuing to try and keep open channels with government, both to kind of press around areas like this, definition of affordability, but also actually to press for a long-term cross-party housing strategy. Because if we could get that, then change could be made in leaps and bounds. I mean, we can do a certain amount, and in partnership with others, we can do even more. But if we could convince the government to work towards a long-term strategy, then really, I think we could unlock things in a very significant way.
Thank you. Benjamin, let me come to you on that. So what can the church, if that's what we need to do, what can we and people like you kind of implemented these projects, how can we make that happen?
Well, I haven't managed to actually implement one directly, but we've got the financial model. So I think the bit for us is the rents really need to be affordable. And for us, we're therefore targeting what the church can do around local housing authority benefits. So basically what people will receive in housing benefits for their housing locally. And that again was drawn out in the Coming Home report. I think that's where the church really needs to focus its attention. It's where the partnership potential becomes really interesting and helpful, because then we're not in competition with other housing associations, but we're a partner with them. And certainly conversations with local housing associations, if that's where our focus was, then actually they'd love to work with us. That actually working with us, particularly on larger sites where there might, so I don't think in any one location the church would want all the housing. So we'd typically want somewhere between 50 and 100 houses on any one area, any one parish, broadly speaking. So we can make a difference to the mix, but not dominate or overwhelm the mix. We're working with affordable housing associations saying we really want the social rent, because that's the people we really want to make sure they get the good quality housing, they can afford their rents. And that's putting our ability to get cheap debt right there alongside the poorest. So I think that's fully aligned. And not only does it mean we're focusing where we really should be focusing on the poorest, but it also opens us up to partnerships with housing associations who take a more blended approach, because it's not just poor people who need housing. I'm poor and I need a house. So there is that sense that actually we work with the whole economy that's delivering housing. But the bit that makes developments unviable, the bit that drives up rent, is where we should be as the church. And that's why I think it's not just an opportunity for us to, we're not going to go too low on this. This is where the partnership really is. It's working with others on blended communities, not just on ghettos.
Benjamin, thank you. And I see an interesting kind of joining that all together about affordable rents and Carol, I think that sense about low energy, all those things that need to go into our house building now. Ed, I wanted to come to you for a moment, because one of the barriers, of course, to good housing is around affordability, financial terms. But one of the other questions raised early on was about maybe adding another S in terms of ability. I can't remember exactly what the S was. Suitable, particularly for those who have perhaps physical disabilities, but maybe, and you talked a bit about some of your community and other barriers to actually making a home. You talked about people who had who just said it was somewhere to sleep. It was just a roof and nothing more. From your perspective and the people that you're ministering with and sharing with in community, what is that about access to housing that would help?
It's difficult to answer. I mean, it's a lot of people that are young and don't quite know what is possible, but feel absolutely sort of blocked in. But yes, I mean, these are people who are in jobs and long term, and yet they're sort of stuck, often out of social housing, and yet the private sector is just utterly unrealistic.
So the conversations that you're having with people in the community there, where are the places of encouragement that they need to hear in terms of the barriers that they have to overcome?
Well, I think it's hard at present to offer hope in this. And I mean, it's been fantastic to hear this and offer a future hope. And I've really enjoyed chatting to more of them recently about housing. But things just happen so fast that they need things immediate, which is really challenging for us to offer anything.
Yeah, and I think certainly from what I've seen of the ministry you've been engaged in and such things as the long table, which offers a place to eat, is that sense of a sense of community and of belonging that will actually then say, yes, actually, I can do something about this. I can find a way through, and that support that I know that that you give towards that. Let's pick up on another issue around the place. How do we've talked about this for the long term, and one of the challenges often around is about the church just selling off its land. But Ben, let me come to you on that. Is there a danger the church just simply sells off its assets?
So there is a risk, or there was a requirement in some ways to sell off some of our land. So if we're to make housing available on this land, on the land we have, sorry, this land being our land, we don't have the financial capacity to build out all the housing stock on that. So if we're looking at partnership, we need to partner with the house building fraternity, if you want to call it that. But we need to work with the whole sector. So some of our land would be sold off. That's true. We do look wherever possible to have long leaseholds on it rather than freehold disposal. So there is a chance for it to come back in the future at some point, but there will be some disposal. But I think the question isn't about the fact that we sell some. The risk is we don't buy any, and that's been something that perplexes our Glebe committee. So Glebe is the investment land the diocese manages. And that's the real question: is where are we buying land? So we do buy pockets of additional land. So we try not to lose our acreage over too much time. And again, if we're looking at a housing association, we can buy land in the right places. So one of the issues is, which I think has been picked up in some of the chat and some quick scan through. So we're not just looking at the housing association building on shiny new developments on the edge of town. There's a real question for how you do urban regeneration in difficult areas. And there's real opportunities for the church to actually move into a mixture of existing housing stock and seeing what we can do there, but also using some of our church sites. So in Bishop Guli's diocese, there's some great opportunities on post-war concrete churches. I mean, they're not the lovely stuff necessarily that I've got just outside my door in Fairford. But there are concrete churches that could be demolished. You could build 5, 6, 7, 8, 20 stories above it. New church community space on the ground floor. And you're reinvesting in existing communities, not just new communities. And buying additional housing, additional land, absolutely should be part of the vision. There's a really interesting fact that the church lost 80% of its local land holdings between 1880 and 1980 when the diocese took over the glebe. 80% of our land disappeared. If we're going to make a difference, we need to get it back. So I think part of our model has to be expanding our land holding so we can be honest stewards, and again, focused on the poorest in our community, not just on making money from land sales.
Benjamin, thank you. Archbishop Justin, let me pick that up with you. There's a bit of conversation going on in the chat here about shouldn't we sell off our land at a cheap rate to do some good with it? And there's people coming back on selling the family silver. What should we be doing with our land?
The experts are the other on the street. The Coming Home report was clear that we should be very careful about how we sell our land. I suppose, I mean, if I'm being provocative, I say we should never sell land, but Ben has forgotten more about this than I'll ever know. So I'm not going to go straight across what he says. But I do think we need to start by looking at what we do with our strategic land, and that we don't simply sell it off for development without participation in that development, and ideally some kind of control, well, more than ideally, necessarily some kind of control over the development that happens, in order to ensure that it is truly affordable, that it meets the 5 S's plus the 6th of suitability. And actually there was a 6th already, so that suitability is the 7th. The 6th was sacrifice. The church is in the business of sacrifice. I'm not saying we should give it away, but we should be willing to take a longer term view over how the return will be achieved. And again, that may need support for dioceses from elsewhere. But I would be very, very cautious about selling off land, and really more than very cautious. I think there has to be a pretty high bar to be jumped by those who want to sell strategic land without control on what happens to it.
Thank you. And I'm aware of some of the conversations that are going on around how you define best value, and that seems to me to be one of the key things within this. Do you just simply define?
Well, it's not as big a problem as it looks, because the law is clear, and has become clearer in a case recently, that best value is not financial best value, it's best value in the context of the charity's aims and intentions, or of the developer's aims and intentions. And if they include meeting the needs of this disadvantage, then that changes the context.
Thank you. I think for articulating that so clearly, and it's something that needs to be said in such clear terms again and again. I want to coming towards the end of our time for discussion. Bishop Guli, I want to come back to you, because there's an interesting question that's been raised about, is the church raising the ambition about the possibilities? Paul's asked this, and we can't deliver. So have we set the bar so high that we're about to trip over it and fall flat on our face?
I think that's a fair question, and I think it's something that we should be aware of. Ever since I've been part of this adventure, I was going to call it an initiative, but I think it's more than that, this adventure, I have sensed a very significant commitment on behalf of everybody, starting with Archbishop Justin, right across all those on the commission, the Housing Commission, and those on the exec and the advisory team now, a real commitment that we do not want to see this report simply become another report that sits on a shelf and gathers dust, and that, you know, it generates a certain amount of interest for a short period of time and then fizzles itself out. The church has been quite good historically at reports like that. And there is a real commitment to ensuring this doesn't happen. I'm also conscious, and I've said this in other places, that at the minute we are very reliant on Gloucester Diocese for supporting the work financially and encouraging us, and there will be a limit to that. So we have to become sustainable in terms of other dioceses and nationally. before Gloucester say, okay, enough's enough, we've done all we can. I think we do need to be conscious of that. So I think there's a huge amount of goodwill here. And my sense of, I think the final thing to say at this stage is my conversations with Alan Smith are enormously encouraging, because if we can work with the church commissioners on this, then I think there is every hope that we can achieve great things. But I don't think we can sit on our laurels and assume that anything's going to happen. We do need to do this in partnership with others, and we do need government to play their part as well, if there's really going to be a revolution in the housing sector.
Thank you. Don't go away, because I might just come to one last question for you. But Paul, just come back. Yes, I absolutely. I think that comes from a really good place. It's a really good challenge to us as a church about saying, actually, we're talking these things. Are we going to deliver on that? And recognize that sense of partnership. And maybe coming from that, Guli, can I? My last question to you would be, we've got lots of people on this call, lots of people from all sorts of different organizations, developers, planners, community groups. What would you want to say to those with whom we might partner in this?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, it does rather depend, doesn't it, on what their expertise is, what their vision and commitment is, does it align with ours, and so on. What I would say is, please feel free to be in touch. Loads and loads of people have been in touch since the report was first produced. I do now have quite a lot of support. Jonathan Tame, I think, is on this call, Chris Beals, Ben himself, and others. You know, I've got a lot of expertise behind me, as it were. And if we receive communication, we do try to respond to everybody. And where there is scope for partnership and for working together and using the expertise of one another, we're absolutely keen to do that, and absolutely wanting to do that, and have got examples of that already. So do be in touch. If in doubt, do be in touch. It might be that I pass it on to somebody who knows a lot more than I do. And it might be that we come back and say, look, we can't do everything at the minute. But we are keeping a list of everybody that we're in contact with, and because we recognize that that is the only way forward, is doing this in partnership with others.
Thank you. And I think that sense about actually common partnerships, one of the things I kind of clearly read from the report, that sense, is there a common cause in which we can share? And that's the crucial bit that will make a difference within this. Alan, let me just come back to you. We heard from you right at the beginning. Is there anything from a church commissioner's perspective that you want just quickly in a minute to say to us as we come to the end of our time?
I think that point of ambition and partnership, if we look at our planned footprint in the period ahead, we have identified 60 sites, 30,000 homes, of which we want 9,000 to be affordable. But what we want to do is start digging beneath that, truly affordable, and in particular then beginning to push into areas of social housing where there is that big gap and where the truly vulnerable are not being served right now. And that point that Bishop Guli said, partnerships that we're doing very strongly, engaging with government, is where collaboratively as the Church of England, with all of our different institutions, we come together to make it happen. And that's how we're seeing it.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to all of those on the panel for your contributions this evening. Lots of really helpful comments in the chat, and I know, Catherine, that we'll capture those, and that will give us more to reflect upon. But also that invitation to engage, and for each of us to play our part within that. Just before we go, and I promise we will be finished at 20 to 8 at the very latest, we are really pleased tonight to be launching a new guide on the housing crisis. Here's what we can do. I think that's very much part of the theme of tonight, in that sense that we can make a positive difference. Really grateful indeed to Jane, Ellie and to Lizzie of Allies and Morrison Architects. This is a step-by-step guide to parishes and to local groups. So this is kind of taking that sense back down locally in our communities. When there's the potential of development, how can we be involved in that in a positive way? It's a really helpful practical guide to understand what's going on and to understand how you can be involved in this. There's a QR code on the screen there, and I think I hope in the chat there will be a link in a moment that you can follow to get hold of that. If not, we'll make sure that we send that out to everyone after we're being together tonight, so that you can get hold of that. But please do have a look at that. Please do, share the link with the communities which you are engaged with, and that, with all that we have seen tonight, will give us the opportunity to say, what are we going to do to address this housing crisis? As Archbishop Justin said a moment ago, as I was reflecting on at the beginning, the shocking statistic at the beginning of the Coming Home report, that then, when it was written, 8 million people in England living in overcrowded, unaffordable, unsustainable homes. That's one of those things which ought to make us sleep slightly uneasily this evening, ameliorated by the fact that we have met together and that we are going to do something about that, not least as it gets worse with all that we are saying. So please do note the web address, and please do sign up for the guide. You can go there, you can sign up, and alongside that you can also, there's the link, you can also register your particular interest to join and make that common coalition with us, that we will make a difference, to the lives of individuals, of families, of the community in this country. Thank you very much indeed. It's been really good to be with everyone this evening. Thanks for those who have prepared and contributed to this. It's been great to share one of these Zoom gatherings with a slightly larger audience, and hopefully that will give us some ideas for some future things that we will do. Can I say particular thank you on my behalf to Chris Beals, who does an extraordinary job in making these things happen and in the networks that make all of this come together. So Chris, a huge thank you to you. And let's again just be still for a moment at the end of our time as we think of those houses that do indeed become homes that are built together into community. And if you would join with me in praying a blessing on our communities and on the work that we do, that good news may be shared, known by the poor, that a year of favour may indeed be known. Amen. And thank you. It's been wonderful to spend this time with you. Thank you very much indeed.